"Look, you're going to submit to this search whether you like it or not," Officer Thompson snarled, pulling the electric clippers from his patrol car with a sick grin spreading across his face. "This is assault. You have no legal authority to do this," said Patricia, the black woman who was cornered by 3 white officers. Thompson's response sent chills down the spines of everyone watching. He laughed, actually laughed, as he powered on the clippers. "We'll decide what's legal around here," he sneered, then pressed the buzzing blades directly into her perfectly styled hair. The sound was sickening. Chunk after chunk of black hair tumbled onto the concrete sidewalk below, as apartment dwellers frantically recorded from their windows above. But here's what made this footage so haunting. She never screamed, never begged, never broke. Her jaw tightened with each brutal pass of those clippers, but her dignity remained intact even as these officers systematically destroyed it. They had no idea they were about to face consequences that would shake the very foundations of law enforcement in America. The woman being violated wasn't just another civilian these officers could intimidate and forget. What they discovered about her true identity would soon transform this street corner assault into a national reckoning that reached the highest levels of government. If this story of injustice and hidden truth has you gripped, hit that subscribe button and type yes, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The bystanders kept filming as hair continued falling, but none of them could have predicted the explosive revelation that was coming. The officers thought they were above the law that day, but they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. What these 3 officers didn't know about the woman they were humiliating would soon turn their world completely upside down. The woman whose hair was being brutally shaved on that sidewalk had a name that commanded respect across 3 continents: General Patricia Washington. But as those clippers destroyed her dignity, not a single person on that street corner knew they were witnessing the assault of one of America's most decorated military leaders. At 52 years old, Patricia Washington had dedicated her entire adult life to serving the country that was now failing to protect her. Her journey through the military ranks had been nothing short of extraordinary and heartbreaking. 28 years of distinguished service had earned her stars that historically had been denied to women who looked like her. The pain of breaking through barriers while facing discrimination had forged her into a leader of unshakable strength. Her service record read like a testament to courage under fire. 2 brutal tours in Afghanistan where she'd stared death in the face and never flinched. A Bronze Star for valor that she'd earned by risking her own life to save wounded soldiers. Leadership of the 82nd Airborne Division's logistics operations, where she commanded thousands of troops who looked to her for guidance in the world's most dangerous places. The hair they were destroying wasn't just hair, it was a symbol of the discipline and dignity that had carried her through decades of military excellence. Every morning, she styled it with the same precision she brought to commanding troops, the same attention to detail that had saved countless lives in combat zones. That Saturday morning, she had simply wanted to visit her elderly aunt in Millfield, Ohio. Dressed in casual jeans and a simple sweater, she looked like any civilian taking a peaceful weekend stroll. The irony was devastating. Here was a woman who had spent nearly 3 decades protecting American freedoms, now having her own freedom stripped away on an American street. The cruel irony of what triggered this nightmare made it even more infuriating. General Washington had stopped to perform an act of simple human kindness, helping an elderly white man named Harold Bennett who had dropped his groceries near Oak and 3rd Street. Her military training had instilled in her a duty to help those in need, regardless of their race or background. But Officers Thompson, Rodriguez, and Carter saw something entirely different. They had been patrolling this predominantly white neighborhood following vague complaints about suspicious activity. Code words that sent chills through anyone who understood their true meaning. When they spotted a black woman interacting with an elderly white resident, their minds immediately jumped to criminal intent. The prejudice was so automatic, so deeply ingrained, it was sickening. Officer Thompson approached with his hand hovering dangerously over his weapon. his voice dripping with suspicion and authority he hadn't earned. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some identification." The general's military discipline kicked in immediately. She complied calmly, producing her driver's license with the same steady composure she'd shown under enemy fire in Afghanistan. But compliance meant nothing to these officers. They claimed her perfectly legitimate ID looked suspicious, a lie so transparent it was insulting. Their demands escalated with frightening speed. They wanted to search her, to violate her constitutional rights based on nothing but the color of her skin. When General Washington politely declined their illegal demands, citing her constitutional rights with the quiet authority of someone who had actually fought to defend those rights, Officer Carter's response revealed the ugly truth. He accused her of resisting and claimed she fit the description of a recent burglary suspect. The description was so vague it was practically meaningless. A black woman, medium height, dark hair. It could have described thousands of women in the city, and these officers knew it. But it gave them the excuse they were looking for to escalate a peaceful encounter into something far more sinister. Hit subscribe if you're as outraged as I am by what's coming next, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. The general stood there, knowing that her decades of military service, her Bronze Star, her command of thousands of troops meant nothing to these officers who saw only her skin color. The woman who had earned the respect of soldiers worldwide was about to be treated like a criminal on the streets of the country she'd sworn to protect. Drop a comment and tell me, how would you feel if someone who had risked their life defending our country was treated like this? What happened next would transform a simple act of kindness into a national crisis that exposed the darkest corners of American policing. What happened next was so shocking, so utterly barbaric, that it would be analyzed in courtrooms and congressional hearings for months to come. Officer Thompson walked back to his patrol car with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He returned carrying hair clippers, equipment he would later claim was for evidence collection, though no police department in America had ever approved such sadistic tools for field use. The three officers moved with coordinated brutality, forcing General Washington against the rough brick wall. Her face pressed against the cold stone as Thompson powered up those clippers, the mechanical buzzing sound cutting through the air like a weapon. "This is how we handle people who don't cooperate," he declared, his voice dripping with malicious satisfaction as multiple cell phones captured every word, every horrifying second. But here's what made this moment so heartbreaking. General Washington's military training kicked in even as she was being violated. While these officers destroyed her dignity, her mind was working with the precision of a battlefield commander. She was memorizing badge numbers, documenting every violation, cataloging evidence, even as they humiliated her. The same mental discipline that had kept her alive in Afghanistan was now her shield against this domestic assault. She knew something these officers didn't understand, that resistance would only give them the justification they craved for escalation. So she endured. She survived. She preserved her life while they destroyed her appearance, knowing that survival was more important than pride in that moment. The composure she maintained during this attack was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Here was a woman who had commanded troops in combat zones, who had earned the respect of hardened soldiers, being treated like an animal by the very people sworn to protect her. Yet she never broke, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Hair continued falling to the sidewalk like pieces of her dignity being stripped away. But something else was happening that these officers couldn't see. With every strand that fell, with every laugh that escaped their lips, they were sealing their own fate. They were creating evidence of their own cruelty, their own violation of everything law enforcement was supposed to represent. The officers made comments about teaching her a lesson, their voices filled with the sick pleasure of bullies who thought they had found an easy victim. They had no idea they were actually teaching America a lesson about the rot that had infected their profession. The footage hit social media like a lightning strike, and within hours, the world was watching in horror. The videos spread across platforms with the speed of wildfire, each share carrying with it a wave of righteous anger that couldn't be contained. The hashtag Justice for Patricia began trending as millions of people witnessed this act of pure evil disguised as policing. What struck viewers most wasn't just the obvious abuse of power, it was the dignity of the victim throughout the entire ordeal. Comments poured in from around the globe, people expressing amazement at her composure, her strength, her refusal to let these officers break her spirit. The contrast was devastating. 3 grown men with badges and guns against one woman who faced their assault with more courage than they had ever shown in their careers. News outlets scrambled to cover the story as civil rights organizations immediately demanded federal investigation. The footage was so clear, so undeniably criminal, that legal experts began appearing on television to explain how many laws had been violated in those few minutes of video. But then came the response that pushed public outrage into pure fury. The Millfield Police Department didn't just defend their officers, they doubled down on the cruelty. Chief Robert Hayes stepped up to a podium and delivered words that would haunt him forever. All protocols were followed, he declared with breathtaking arrogance, claiming that the woman failed to comply with lawful orders. The audacity was staggering. Here was a police chief looking at footage of his officers committing what was clearly assault and battery, and he was defending it as proper procedure. His response didn't just add insult to injury, it exposed the systemic rot that made such incidents possible. Public outrage exploded like a volcano. Protests erupted in cities across the nation as people demanded not just justice for this one woman, but accountability for a system that could produce such monsters in uniform. Federal investigators from the Civil Rights Division couldn't ignore the evidence pouring across their screens. Within 48 hours, they had opened a formal review. The FBI launched a parallel investigation into potential civil rights violations. Legal experts flooded news programs, their voices shaking with anger as they explained how the officers' actions had violated multiple constitutional amendments and state laws. If this story is making your blood boil like mine, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore some faith in justice. The community response was building into something these officers had never expected: real consequences. For once, their badges wouldn't protect them from the fury of a nation that had finally seen enough. Tell me in the comments, do you think these officers actually believed they would get away with this? Or were they just that confident the system would protect them? But the officers had made one crucial mistake. They had chosen the wrong victim, and soon the entire world would learn exactly who they had assaulted. District Attorney Sarah Mitchell stared at the footage for the 100th time, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and determination. She knew this case would either define her career as a champion of justice or destroy it completely. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but she couldn't let it break her. Not when an innocent woman had already been broken by the very system Mitchell had sworn to serve. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Multiple video angles capturing every horrific second, witness testimony from traumatized bystanders, and most damning of all, the officers' own body camera footage that revealed their casual cruelty in sickening detail. But Mitchell's heart sank when she looked at the statistics. Police officers rarely faced serious consequences for misconduct, especially when their victims were Black women whose pain society had been trained to ignore. The bitter truth ate at her soul. She was fighting an uphill battle in a system designed to protect those who wore badges, even when they used those badges as weapons against the innocent. But Mitchell refused to let cynicism win. She assembled a team of the state's most brilliant prosecutors, legal warriors who shared her hunger for justice and her disgust at what they had witnessed. Meanwhile, something extraordinary was happening that nobody, not the public, not even Mitchell's prosecution team, could have anticipated. General Washington had maintained her civilian identity throughout the investigation, giving only her legal name and address. Her military service wasn't apparent from standard background checks, and she had deliberately chosen not to reveal her true identity, wanting justice to be based on the crime itself, not on who she was. But the community was rallying around her in ways that brought tears to the eyes of everyone involved. Character witnesses emerged like flowers blooming after a storm. Neighbors came forward with stories of her quiet kindness, how she had helped elderly residents with groceries, how she had volunteered at community events, how she had treated everyone with dignity and respect. Harold Bennett, the elderly man she had helped before the assault, was consumed by guilt that his simple need for assistance had led to her brutalization. His testimony would be heartbreaking. This fragile old man, weeping as he described how a woman's act of kindness toward him had resulted in her being treated like an animal by police officers. Community members who had interacted with General Washington during her visits to Millfield painted a picture of a woman whose character was beyond reproach. Their words carried the weight of genuine love and respect, the kind that couldn't be manufactured or coached. On the other side, the defense attorneys for Officers Thompson, Rodriguez, and Carter prepared their strategy with the cold calculation of lawyers who had defended the indefensible before. Their approach was predictable and nauseating: paint their clients as dedicated public servants who feared for their safety, who followed their training, who acted reasonably under dangerous circumstances. The strategy was as insulting as it was familiar. They would try to transform 3 grown men with weapons who had brutalized an unarmed woman into victims deserving of sympathy and protection. The trial opened to a courtroom packed with spectators whose emotions ranged from hope to fury to heartbreak. National media attention turned the proceedings into a referendum on American justice itself. Every seat was filled with people who had seen the footage and demanded accountability. Prosecutor Mitchell presented the state's case with methodical precision that left no room for doubt. She showed the videos frame by frame, each second more damning than the last. Witnesses testified about the officers' unprovoked aggression, their voices shaking with emotion as they relived the trauma of watching a human being degraded for sport. The defense fought back with arguments that were both predictable and infuriating. They portrayed Thompson, Rodriguez, and Carter as dedicated public servants making split-second decisions in what they claimed was a dangerous situation. The audacity was breathtaking, calling the assault of an unarmed woman helping an elderly man a dangerous situation. Then came the moment that would be remembered in legal history forever. When called to testify, the woman approached the witness stand wearing a simple business suit, her hair still bearing the scars of the assault these officers had inflicted. The partial regrowth couldn't hide the damage they had done, the humiliation they had tried to brand into her very identity. She raised her right hand to take the oath, and then spoke words that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "General Patricia Washington, United States Army." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear hearts stopping, breath catching in throats, the sound of a defense strategy crumbling in real time. What happened next was devastating in its quiet power. General Washington detailed her military service with the same composure she had shown during the assault. Her rank, her decorations, her years of service to the very country these officers claimed to protect. Each word landed like a bomb in the defense's case. The impact was immediate and catastrophic for the defense. Here sat a decorated war hero, a woman who had risked her life for American freedom, describing how she had been brutalized by American police officers. The contrast was so stark, so morally clear, that it left no room for confusion about who the real criminals were. Defense attorney Mark Stevens objected frantically, his voice rising with desperation as he claimed military service was irrelevant to the case. But everyone in that courtroom knew the damage was done. The jury now understood they were looking at someone who embodied everything these officers had been. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. In those precious hours, justice hung in the balance, the hopes of a nation resting on 12 citizens who had witnessed evil and been asked to name it for what it was. When they returned, their faces carried the weight of history and the satisfaction of having done what was right. Guilty. Guilty on all charges against all 3 officers: assault under color of authority, violation of civil rights, conspiracy. The words rang through the courtroom like bells of justice finally tolling for those who had escaped accountability for too long. Officer Thompson received 5 years in federal prison. 5 years to think about the woman whose dignity he had tried to destroy. Officers Rodriguez and Carter each received 3 years, time to contemplate their roles in one of the most shameful displays of police misconduct in modern history. Chief Robert Hayes, who had defended these monsters and called their actions proper procedure, announced his resignation the day after the verdict. His career ended in the disgrace he had earned through his cowardice and complicity. But the most powerful moment came at the sentencing hearing. General Washington appeared in full military dress uniform, her medals and ribbons telling the story of nearly 3 decades of distinguished service. Her hair had grown back partially, but she chose not to style it completely, letting the world see both the damage that had been done and her resilience in overcoming it. She addressed the court with the same composure she had shown during the assault, her words carrying the weight of someone who had served her country with honor and expected that country to serve justice in return. She spoke about accountability, about the need for systemic change, about the hope that her suffering might prevent others from experiencing the same brutalization. The case became a landmark precedent for civil rights prosecutions and led to federal legislation requiring better training and accountability measures for law enforcement. But more than that, it became a symbol of what was possible when courage met justice, when dignity refused to be destroyed by hatred. General Washington returned to her military duties, but her courage in seeking justice inspired countless others to speak out against abuse of power and discrimination. Her story became proof that one person's refusal to accept injustice could create change that rippled across an entire nation. If this story of courage and justice moved you like it moved me, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories of everyday heroes who refuse to stay silent that you need to hear. The final message was clear. When dignity meets determination, when courage confronts corruption, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. General Washington's story demonstrated that the pursuit of accountability through proper legal channels could create lasting change in systems that had operated without consequences for far too long. Tell me in the comments, what other stories of hidden heroes standing up to injustice do you want to hear about next?